They thought they'd found ghosts. Turns out they'd found something far worse. Humans who'd had 300 years to get creative about violence. The distress beacon was older than my grandfather's grandfather, which for a Velkari with our 17-generation lifespans, meant it was ancient. Senior Scanner fictional stood before the holographic display aboard the survey vessel Luminous Accord, his 4 eye stalks twitching in patterns that betrayed his confusion. "Captain Warner," he said, voice crackling through his translator implant. This cannot be correct." I approached the display, my exoskeleton clicking softly against the deck plating. The beacon's signature was unmistakable, a human design from the early diaspora period when that terrifying species had first begun spreading through the galaxy like a particularly aggressive fungus. "What am I looking at, Thex?" I asked, though part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "A colony ship, human. Registry indicates it was called the Remembrance. Departed Earth approximately 317 standard cycles ago." He paused, manipulating the display with his tentacles. "Captain, according to Galactic Council records, this vessel was lost with all hands. Total crew complement, 42,000 souls. Status, presumed destroyed in a stellar anomaly." I felt my respiratory sacs constrict, a physical reaction we Velkari have when sensing danger. Humans didn't just die. They had this unfortunate habit of surviving things that would annihilate any reasonable species, then coming back angrier and significantly more dangerous. "Show me the beacon's location," I ordered. The display shifted, revealing a star system with 7 planets. The 4th one, a terrestrial world with abundant water and vegetation, pulsed with a faint amber glow. That's a garden world," breathed Junior Navigator Prex, her voice hushed with something between awe and terror. "Class A habitability rating, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, liquid water, native biosphere, and completely uncharted," added Thextal. "No Galactic Council presence, no trade routes, nothing." I stared at that pulsing amber dot and felt a sensation my people rarely experienced, genuine bone-deep dread. Because here's the thing about humans that every species in the known galaxy had learned the hard way. You never, under any circumstances, leave them alone for 300 years on a habitable world. They don't sit quietly, they don't maintain status quo, they innovate, they adapt, they turn every disadvantage into a weapon and every setback into a grudge that they'll nurse for generations. "Set course for the 4th planet," I said, my voice steady despite my churning insides. "Maximum caution. Passive scans only until we know what we're dealing with." "Captain," Prex ventured carefully, "shouldn't we report this to the Council first?" I considered that for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then I thought about the bureaucratic nightmare that would follow, the committees, the debates, the inevitable decision to send a full military expedition, which would likely provoke exactly the kind of response that would get thousands of beings killed. "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. We're a scientific survey vessel. We survey first, report later. Understood?" The crew exchanged glances, the universal gesture of beings who know their captain is making a questionable decision, but are too professional to argue. I appreciated that about them. The approach took 18 hours, during which our passive sensors painted an increasingly disturbing picture. "Captain," Thexnall's voice had risen 3 octaves, which for a Velkari meant he was approaching panic. "You need to see this." I abandoned my meditation chamber, where I'd been utterly failing to achieve any sort of calm, and hurried to the bridge. The main display showed the 4th planet in stunning detail, and what I saw made my respiratory sacs freeze mid-cycle. Cities, dozens of them, sprawling metropolises connected by what appeared to be a continental transport network. Agricultural zones stretching across entire continents, orbital facilities, hundreds of them, everything from communications satellites to what looked distressingly like weapons platforms. Industrial complexes pumping smoke into carefully managed atmospheric layers. And everywhere, the unmistakable signs of military fortification. "By the eternal currents," whispered Prex. "They didn't just survive, they thrived." "How many?" I asked, dreading the answer. Thexnall's tentacles danced across his console. "Population estimates based on thermal signatures, power consumption, and settlement patterns." He paused, double-checking his readings. "Approximately 470 million. Silence descended on the bridge like a physical weight. 42,000 survivors had become nearly 500 million in 3 centuries. The mathematics of it were staggering. The implications were terrifying. "They've been breeding like Terran rabbits," muttered Weapons Officer Krell, a gruff Morvian whose species had fought a brief, disastrous war with humanity 2 generations back. "And building. Look at those orbital platforms. Those aren't civilian installations." He was right. The platforms had the distinctive architecture of military hardware, reinforced hulls, radiation shielding far beyond civilian requirements, and what my experienced eye recognized as weapons emplacements. Lots of them. "They're expecting trouble," I said quietly. "The question is, are they expecting us specifically, or trouble in general?" "Captain," Thexnol again, his voice now approaching genuine alarm. "We're being scanned. Active sensor sweep, multi-spectrum analysis, weapons-grade precision. Evasive maneuvers," I barked. But even as I spoke, I knew it was futile. We were a science vessel, not a warship. Our engines were designed for efficiency, not speed. If they wanted to hurt us, there was absolutely nothing we could do to stop them. 3 seconds later, our communications array chirped with an incoming transmission. Standard Galactic Common, which was mildly surprising. The voice that followed was decidedly not standard anything. "Unknown vessel, this is Fortress Command of the Free Republic of New Terra," said a human voice, male, calm, professional, and somehow more threatening because of that calmness. "You have entered sovereign New Terran space without authorization. State your intentions immediately, or be destroyed. You have 60 seconds to comply." I exchanged glances with my senior staff. Thexnol's eye stalks had gone completely rigid, a sign of extreme stress. Prex was muttering prayers to the navigator's stars. Krell simply looked resigned, like he'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. "Open a channel," I ordered, straightening my exoskeleton and trying to project confidence I absolutely did not feel. "This is Captain Vorner of the Velkari survey vessel Luminous Accord, operating under the authority of the Galactic Council's Scientific Division. We received your distress beacon and came to render assistance. We mean you no harm." The response came immediately, which suggested they'd been expecting exactly that answer. "Captain Vorner," said the voice, now with a hint of amusement that made my insides twist unpleasantly, "that distress beacon is 317 years old. Do we look like we're in distress?" "Fair point." I glanced at the tactical display, which showed a thriving civilization that had clearly mastered their environment and built enough military hardware to make a mid-level council member species nervous. "No," I admitted, because honesty seemed like the best policy when dealing with beings who'd already demonstrated the ability to vaporize my ship. "You do not. However, Galactic Council protocols require investigation of all distress signals, regardless of age. We were simply following procedure." Silence. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Just when I thought we might actually die without another word, the voice returned. "Understood, Captain. We appreciate the sentiment, even if it comes a few centuries late." Another pause then. "You're being assigned a priority landing vector at Capital City Spaceport. Follow the transmitted flight path exactly. Deviation will result in immediate defensive action. Once on the ground, you and your senior staff will be escorted to Government House for formal diplomatic discussions. Welcome to New Terra. Try not to cause any incidents." The transmission cut. A navigation overlay appeared on our helm display, a precise path leading down to the largest city on the planet's primary continent. "Well," said Krell dryly, "at least they said welcome before threatening to shoot us." The descent through New Terra's atmosphere was an education in controlled terror. Our sensors picked up no fewer than 47 separate weapons locks tracking our every movement. Everything from surface-to-orbit missiles, to what appeared to be honest-to-goodness particle cannons. The humans were taking absolutely no chances. The city itself was a marvel of engineering, blending pre-industrial aesthetics with clearly advanced technology. Buildings of stone and steel reached toward the sky, connected by elevated transit systems. Parks and green spaces broke up the urban landscape, suggesting they'd learned something about sustainable city planning. And everywhere were fortifications. Walls, guard towers, barracks, armories. This wasn't just a city, it was a fortress pretending to be a city and not trying very hard to hide it. We touched down at the spaceport, a massive facility that could easily handle ships 10 times our size. As our boarding ramp extended, I saw the welcoming committee, 20 humans in military uniforms, heavily armed, standing in precise formation. In the center stood a woman in her middle years, wearing what appeared to be formal diplomatic attire, though I noticed the sidearm on her hip was far from ceremonial. I descended the ramp with Thexanol and Prex flanking me, leaving Krell aboard to maintain ship security. The gravity was slightly heavier than standard, which explained why these humans looked even more muscular than their spacefaring cousins. The woman stepped forward, extending her hand in the traditional human greeting. I'd studied their customs extensively, so I understood this was meant as a gesture of peaceful intent, though the evolutionary origins involved proving you weren't carrying weapons, which seemed darkly appropriate given our circumstances. "Captain Varner," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm Ambassador Elena Frost, New Terran Department of External Affairs. On behalf of President Morrison and the people of New Terra, welcome to our world." I accepted the handshake, noting the strength in her grip. "Thank you, Ambassador Frost. I apologize for the unexpected intrusion." "Oh, we've been expecting you," she said cheerfully, which was not a comforting thing to hear, or someone like you anyway. 300 years is a long time to maintain a distress beacon. We figured eventually somebody would get curious. "You've been expecting contact?" Thexnal asked, his translator struggling with his incredulous tone. "Of course." Ambassador Frost gestured toward a waiting ground vehicle, sleek and clearly armored. "Shall we? The President is eager to meet you. We have so much to discuss." As we climbed into the vehicle, I noticed something chilling. Every single human we passed, civilian or military, watched us with the same expression. Not hostile, exactly. More calculating, like they were running threat assessments, planning contingencies, preparing for violence that might never come but they'd be ready for anyway. These weren't the desperate survivors of a lost colony. These were something far more dangerous. Humans who'd had 3 centuries to prepare for a galaxy they knew was out there but had never bothered to come find them. And now that we'd finally arrived, I had the distinct impression they'd been waiting to show us exactly what they'd built in our absence. The vehicle accelerated smoothly through city streets, and I watched the fortified buildings slide past, each one a reminder that we'd made a terrible mistake. We'd found a lost colony, but they'd never been lost. They'd been preparing. And now, sitting in this armored vehicle, surrounded by beings who'd turned survival into an art form and isolation into a weapon, I wondered if the Galactic Council had any idea what was coming. Somehow, I suspected not. Somehow, I suspected we were all about to find out just how dangerous, patient, creative, isolated humans could be. And as Ambassador Frost smiled at me from across the vehicle's cabin, that smile still not reaching her calculating eyes, I realized with perfect clarity, they'd been waiting for this moment for 300 years. And they were ready. Government House turned out to be less a house and more a fortress disguised as a palatial administrative complex, which I was beginning to realize was the architectural theme for this entire civilization. Thick walls, reinforced foundations, windows that I strongly suspected were made of something significantly more durable than glass. Even the decorative gardens had clear sight lines and what looked suspiciously like concealed defensive positions. Ambassador Frost led us through corridors lined with artwork, historical displays, and what I initially mistook for propaganda until I realized it was actually just history. Images of the original colony ship, photographs of the first settlements, memorials to the early dead, and there had been many, judging by the names carved into polished stone. The first 50 years were difficult, Frost said conversationally, noticing my attention to a particularly somber memorial wall. The remembrance crashed rather than landed. We lost 18,000 people in the impact alone, another 6,000 in the first winter. Disease, starvation, equipment failures, native predators, you name it. New Terra tried to kill us with it. Predators? Thexnal asked nervously, his eye stalks swiveling as if expecting something to leap from the ornate ceiling. Oh yes, Frost's smile turned genuinely warm for the first time. The Razorbacks were particularly nasty. 2-ton carnivores, pack hunters, armored hides, claws that could shred plasteel. Beautiful creatures, really. Nearly wiped out the northern settlements in Year 7. How did you survive? Prex asked quietly. Frost's smile acquired a sharp edge. We did what humans do best. Navigator. We adapted, studied them, learned their patterns, then we hunted them to near extinction, domesticated the survivors, and now we use them as livestock guardians. Turns out Razorbacks are excellent at protecting herds once you convince them that other humans aren't food. The casual way she described genocide followed by domestication followed by agricultural integration made my respiratory sacs constrict again. This was the human pattern, refined over millennia. Encounter problem, understand problem, eliminate or control problem, weaponize problem. We entered a large conference room where a dozen humans waited, half in military uniforms, half in civilian attire. At the head of the table sat a man in his 60s, silver-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades making difficult decisions and living with the consequences. "Captain Warner," he said, rising with the fluid grace of maintained fitness. "President Marcus Morrison, please sit. You've had a long journey, and we have much to discuss." We took our seats, and I noticed immediately that despite the cordial atmosphere, we were surrounded. Not obviously, not threateningly, but definitely surrounded. Each door had guards stationed just outside. Each window had clear tactical value. The humans had positioned themselves with military precision disguised as casual seating arrangements. "Mr. President," I began carefully, "I want to assure you that the Galactic Council has no idea we exist," Morrison interrupted smoothly. "Yes, we know. We've been monitoring Council transmissions for nearly 2 centuries now. Fascinating civilization you've built out there. Very orderly, very bureaucratic, very much not equipped to deal with species that don't follow the rules." The bluntness was shocking. The Kesnel made a strangled sound. Prex's breathing accelerated. I simply stared. "You've been monitoring us?" I managed finally. "Of course," Morrison leaned back, fingers steepled. "The Remembrance may have been a colony ship, but it was also equipped with long-range communications arrays, sensor packages, and extremely sophisticated signal processing equipment. When we crashed, most of it survived. We've spent 3 centuries listening to your radio chatter, watching your news broadcasts, studying your politics, analyzing your military capabilities." He paused, letting that sink in. "You've been having a lovely time out there, Captain. Building your little federation, making your little laws, congratulating yourselves on how civilized you've become. While you've been doing what, exactly?" I asked, anger finally breaking through my diplomatic training. "Building weapons? Preparing for war? Planning invasion?" The room went very quiet. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the atmosphere, like the moment before a storm breaks. "No, Captain," he said softly. "We've been preparing for survival. There's a difference." He gestured, and a holographic display activated above the table. What I saw made absolutely no sense at first. Star charts, trajectory calculations, threat assessments, and in the center, a region of space marked in angry crimson. "Tell me, Captain Warner," Morrison continued, his voice taking on the lecturing tone of a professor addressing particularly slow students. "What do you know about the Velkari first contact incident? The one that happened approximately 450 years ago?" I blinked, confused by the sudden shift. The destruction of the scout fleet? Every child learns that history. An unknown hostile force obliterated 3 scout vessels in the outer reaches. Total casualties 2,300 beings. The attackers were never identified. The Council established quarantine zones and never told anyone what they actually found, Morrison finished, because they couldn't explain it, couldn't categorize it, couldn't fit it into their neat little boxes of known hostile species. He manipulated the display, zooming into that crimson region. "They found something worse, Captain. Something that made them so terrified they classified everything beyond top secret and pretended the whole incident was just random pirates or spatial anomalies." "How do you know this?" the Kesnel demanded, his translator crackling with stress. "Because we've been listening," answered a woman to Morrison's left, wearing a military uniform with more medals than I could count. "General Sarah Vikram, New Terran Defense Forces. For 237 years we've intercepted and decoded every classified Council transmission that uses electromagnetic radiation. Your encryption is excellent by galactic standards. Fortunately, human standards are significantly higher." She smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "We know about the Devourers," she said quietly. "The species your Council encountered and couldn't stop. The ones that consume entire biospheres, strip worlds to bedrock, and move on to the next target. The ones currently spreading through the outer reaches at a rate of approximately 3 systems per year. The ones your Council has been desperately trying to contain while praying they don't reach core territories." I felt cold, genuinely, physically cold, which shouldn't have been possible in this climate-controlled room. That's classified information," I whispered. "Highest security level. How could you possibly know about the apocalypse your government has been hiding from its citizens?" Morrison's voice carried equal parts anger and contempt. "Because unlike your Council, Captain, we don't believe in keeping our people ignorant of existential threats. When we decoded those transmissions 70 years ago and realized what was coming, we didn't panic, we didn't debate, We didn't form committees to study the problem. He stood, walking to the window overlooking the fortified city. We prepared, we mobilized. We turned this entire world into a fortress. Every citizen trained, every resource allocated, every technological advancement focused on a single question: how do we survive what's coming? You can't possibly think you can fight the Devourers, Prex said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Council's most advanced fleets have been unable to stop them. They adapt to every weapon, overcome every defense. They're unstoppable. Maybe, Morrison acknowledged, or maybe the Council has been fighting them wrong. Maybe the problem isn't the Devourers, it's the approach. Your Council fights wars like civilized beings, calculated strikes, measured responses, always concerned about collateral damage and political consequences. His reflection in the window smiled grimly. We don't have that luxury. We're one world, one population, no reinforcements, no fallback position. When the Devourers arrive, and they will arrive, we either win or we die. Those are the only options. Ambassador Frost activated another display, this one showing technical schematics that made my engineering background scream in alarm. Kinetic bombardment platforms, she explained cheerfully. 273 orbital installations capable of dropping tungsten rods at relativistic velocities. Each rod carries the destructive power of a tactical nuclear weapon, and we can deploy 16,000 of them simultaneously across any planetary surface within 6 hours. Biological Warfare Division, added General Vikram, switching displays. We've catalogued every native pathogen on New Terra, weaponized the 97 most effective ones, and developed deployment systems that can saturate an entire continent in 48 hours. Genocidal? Absolutely. Effective? We've run the simulations 1,000 times. Mortality rate against carbon-based lifeforms averages 87% within 96 hours of exposure. Genetic modification programs, continued a thin man wearing a scientist's coat. Dr. James Park, Biological Enhancement Division. 300 years of selective breeding combined with carefully regulated genetic engineering has produced a human population with enhanced reflexes, improved cognitive function, increased muscle density, and resistance to 17 different classes of toxins. Our soldiers aren't just trained, Captain. They're designed. Display after display, weapon after weapon, strategy after strategy. They'd spent 3 centuries building an arsenal that would make the Council's military forces look like children playing with toys. You're planning to fight a war against an enemy that might never come, I said, struggling to process what I was seeing. No, Captain, Morrison corrected gently. We're planning to survive a war that's definitely coming. Your Council's projections, which we've also intercepted, give the Devourers approximately 80 to 120 years before they exhaust the outer reaches and begin advancing toward core territories. Depending on their route, they could arrive here anywhere from 115 to 140 years from now. He returned to his seat, fixing me with an intense stare. So here's the situation, Captain Varner. You've found us. Congratulations. Now you have a choice. You can return to the Council and report everything you've learned. They'll panic. They'll send diplomats, then inspectors, then probably a military force to ensure compliance with galactic norms. We'll refuse. There will be conflict. Resources and lives will be wasted fighting each other instead of preparing for what's coming. Or, I asked, though I dreaded the answer, or you tell them you found a lost colony, alive and thriving, interested in peaceful contact but not ready for full Council integration. We establish trade relations, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and when the Devourers arrive, the Council discovers it has an ally that's been preparing for this war since before most Council members even knew it existed. You're asking me to lie to my government, I said flatly. I'm asking you to prioritize survival over bureaucracy, Morrison countered. Your Council is fighting a losing war against an enemy they don't understand, using strategies that haven't worked for 4 centuries. We've spent 300 years preparing for exactly this scenario. We have weapons your scientists haven't imagined, tactics your military hasn't conceived, and most importantly, we have the will to do what's necessary, no matter how ugly it gets. He leaned forward, and I saw the absolute conviction in his eyes. The Devourers are coming, Captain. Your Council knows it. We know it. The only question is whether we face them divided, wasting resources fighting each other, or united, combining your resources with our ruthlessness. Because make no mistake, when they arrive, there won't be room for civilized warfare or ethical debates. There will only be survival or extinction. The room fell silent. I looked at my officers. Fictional's eye stalks were rigid with stress. Prix was trembling slightly, overwhelmed by information no navigator should have to process. And I felt the weight of a decision that would affect billions of lives. "You've been listening to our transmissions for 2 centuries, I said slowly. "You've decoded our highest security classifications. You've learned our secrets, studied our weaknesses, analyzed our military capabilities. Tell me, President Morrison, if we refuse your offer, if we report everything to the Council, what happens?" Morrison's expression didn't change, but General Vikram answered instead, her voice cold and professional. "Then we activate defensive protocols. Your ship will be detained. You and your crew will be guests of New Terra until we determine how to proceed. We have no desire to harm you, Captain, but we will not allow 300 years of preparation to be compromised because the Galactic Council can't handle information it finds uncomfortable. So we're prisoners," Thexnell said bitterly. "Your potential allies being given time to make the right decision," Morrison corrected. "We don't expect an answer immediately. Take time, review our data, understand what we've built and why, then decide, do you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem we have to work around?" Ambassador Frost stood, her professional smile returning. "We've prepared quarters for you and your crew, comfortable, secure, with full access to our historical archives and non-classified technical databases. Learn about New Terra, understand our perspective, and when you're ready to talk again, we'll be here." 3 days later, I stood in my assigned quarters, staring at a datapad filled with intercepted Council transmissions that Morrison's people had graciously provided. Everything they'd claimed was true. The Devourers were real, the Council was losing, and the projections suggested that within 2 centuries, the entire Galactic Council might cease to exist. Vixnau entered quietly, his usual nervous energy replaced by exhausted resignation. "I've reviewed the biological warfare specifications," he said quietly. "Captain, what they've built, it's horrifying. Weapons that could sterilize planets, pathogens that could wipe out entire species, genetic modifications that violate every ethical standard the Council maintains." "I know," I said softly. "But it might work," he continued, voice barely above a whisper, "against the Devourers, against conventional warfare, against any threat they might face. It's monstrous, but it might actually work." "I know," I repeated. Prex appeared in the doorway, her expression haunted. "I've been speaking with their military planners," she said. "They've run simulations for every possible Devourer attack scenario. Thousands of simulations. And they win, Captain. Not every time, but 73% victory rate across all scenarios. The Council's best strategies max out at 18%. I nodded slowly, accepting what I'd already begun to suspect. "They're not monsters," I said quietly. "They're survivors who've had 300 years to become what they needed to be, and they're offering us a choice. Accept them as allies, imperfect and terrifying as they are, or face the future without the only beings who've actually figured out how to fight what's coming." "What are you going to tell the Council?" Thexnell asked. I looked at the datapad, at the evidence of conspiracy and preparation, at the proof that sometimes survival requires becoming something your civilization might not recognize. "I'm going to tell them we found a lost colony," I said finally. "Alive, thriving, interested in contact. I'm going to recommend establishing diplomatic relations, trade, cultural exchange, slow integration. And the weapons, the preparations, the violations of every ethical standard we maintain, I'm going to leave those out," I admitted. "Not because I'm comfortable with it, not because I approve, but because in 120 years, give or take, the Devourers are going to arrive at Council space, and when they do, I want these terrifying, brilliant, ruthless humans on our side." I stood, straightening my exoskeleton. "Request a meeting with President Morrison. Tell him we're ready to discuss terms." As my officers departed to deliver the message, I looked out the window at the fortified city below, watching human civilians going about their daily lives, unaware that each one had been born into a civilization at war with a future that hadn't arrived yet. 300 years ago, 42,000 humans had crashed on this world and faced extinction. They'd survived. They'd thrived. They'd prepared. And now, whether the Galactic Council was ready or not, they were coming back to a galaxy that had forgotten them. The lost colony had been found. But it was the galaxy that was about to learn what it meant to be truly lost without allies like these. Because when the Devourers finally arrived, they wouldn't face the civilized, ethical, cautious Galactic Council alone. They'd face humans. Humans who'd had centuries to get creative about violence. Humans who'd turned survival into a science and warfare into an art. Humans who'd never forgotten that sometimes, the only thing standing between civilization and extinction is the will to do absolutely whatever it takes. Morrison had been right about one thing: the devourers were coming. But so were the humans. And I suspected that when those two forces finally met, the galaxy was going to discover which one was actually more terrifying. My money, for what it was worth, was on the species that had spent 300 years planning for exactly this moment. The galaxy had abandoned them. Now they were coming home, and they were bringing gifts. Very, very dangerous gifts.
What would you do if you discovered a lost colony that had become more dangerous than the galaxy itself? Could humanity's ruthlessness be our greatest survival trait? Drop your thoughts below and smash that subscribe button for more HFY stories, where humanity refuses to stay down. See you in the next one, Space Explorers.